Welcome to How to Commit Journalism, part of Capital Broadcasting's podcast network. I'm Ashley Talley, executive producer here at WRAL News. Today I'm going to be talking with Joe Fisher, one of our multimedia journalists who's been covering Reopen NC.
And the main organizer of Reopen NC standing up at the microphone, getting the crowd to understand what they want, saying no more to Governor Roy Cooper, that they want North Carolina to reopen now, not a month from now, not any later than today.
They have been coming to Raleigh to protest almost every Tuesday since mid-April. The crowds have been medium-sized at first, very large a couple of weeks, even some arrests made. And they say that they're planning even bigger ones across the state. Covering a protest during a pandemic is not an easy thing. Joe Fisher talks about how he works to tell people stories while maintaining social distance and making sure he remains safe. COVID-19 has been the biggest story in the world for the past months, I guess going on 6 months now. You, as a Dayside beat reporter, cover a lot of different parts of it. One thing you've covered often is the Reopen NC group. Tell me who this group is. I was trying to remember how we first heard about them, and I think that I got emails from Cullen Browder, our investigative reporter, and Travis Fain, who works with our NC Capitol team, and I'm sure you too, but it sort of blossomed on Facebook. Is that right?
That's right. A group of people started this movement to reopen the economy pretty early on, early April. And this stemmed from a Facebook page that had a couple of hundred people. And it has since ballooned to more than 70,000 people, many of them who are showing up at these weekly protests demanding that the governor reopen the economy. This is something we're still dealing with now and will probably still be dealing with a month or so from now.
And so this was mid-April, I believe, that they first started, right? Didn't you say the first protest was on April 14th, I believe? So this was far from moving into phase two, right? Reopening at all. This was really kind of in the heart when everybody was still hunkered down. What is this group against? What do they want?
This group truly believes that their civil rights are being violated. They think that the executive orders to stay at home, to close businesses, to close churches and other services is, a violation of their rights. They should be able to do what they want. And that is just not what the governor's orders are saying. He is saying that we need to stay home for the public health risk. And they really feel that the economic crisis far outweighs the public health crisis.
So I know that one question that is asked from the opposing side is, okay, so a few lives are okay. What if it's your mother, your grandmother, your child that's got to die? Is that, does that put it in a different perspective? But I think they look at a bigger picture. Is that how you think they would answer?
I've asked some of the protesters, if we were to open up fully and one of your family members was to be infected with COVID-19, would you accept that as a consequence of this? And many of them have said that they would. And they say that a lot of them believe that even when we do open up, more people will be infected. They think herd immunity is down the line, and they just want to start that process faster.
This group, from what I remember, was started by 3 women, mothers from Western North Carolina. Do any of them have any political connections, or are these just 3, regular North Carolinians who had a feeling about something and started a Facebook group?
I think that they certainly have some conservative values. They don't agree with what is happening. In fact, they call the orders tyranny. So I think that there is no political tie, so to speak, from this group or to this group. They will tell you that it's really people from all sides of the aisle, but it's certainly conservative leaning in a respect of they want government to get out of the way and they want businesses to be able to open so that they can, make some money.
So take me to these rallies. You, I think, are the only reporter who's been there each time that they have rallied in downtown Raleigh. What was the first rally like? What was it like to cover it? And was it what you expected?
I don't think anyone knew what to expect. The first protest popped up on April 14th. There were about 150 people there. And we had heard that the next week on April 21st that there was going to be a bigger crowd. So we certainly prepared for that. We had multiple crews assigned to this protest. We had our chopper that was ready to be in the air to get aerials of the crowd size.
Even had Brian Schrader in the chopper so that he could, report from the air. Yeah.
Right. And that's incredibly helpful because you can not only see what's happening right over the protest, but the people who are converging on that one area right by the legislative building. So we thought, hey, if the crowd size doubles, this is obviously a movement that people are really getting behind. And it turned into more than 1,000 people that second week that marched for more than 4 hours. They were chanting, they were holding signs, they were holding flags, American flags, North Carolina flags, Trump flags. And it really was chaos at some points. They were shouting at police officers. They were shouting at counter protesters, some of the healthcare professionals and nurses who showed up to say, hey, let's pump the brakes here. We need to slow down and open up very gradually, screaming in their faces, insulting them. And it did become a mess at times.
I remember a noon newscast, because these started around 11 a.m., I think. And, you being on the street, the beginning of the noon, camera person behind you. I don't remember which photographer it was. But there was a state senator there. Tell me about that experience. This was the first time we, were in the midst of everything. What was it like to cover that? And tell me about that state representative.
So this was, a United States representative. Congressman Dan Bishop was in the crowd for that day because the previous protest, the first one, Raleigh police sent out a tweet that essentially said that protesting is not an essential activity, which really sparked some nerves. People got really ticked off at that. Every side of the aisle, people agreed that tweet was maybe a little too much.
Though Raleigh didn't back off of it, right? They doubled down a little.
They did double down. They posted a statement to their Twitter. They posted a statement to the city's website defending the fact that they broke up the protest because really people were not social distancing at that protest. And that was it was a newer rule at the time that people needed to be 6 feet apart if they were in gatherings, I believe, over 10 people. And fast forward to weeks 2, 3, 4, 5, and now 6 coming up, people still have not taken those social distancing rules into effect. There is very limited social distancing at these events. And it's really even hard for the news media and we as reporters to cover this kind of thing week after week because we're used to being so close to the action. And in these situations, you really have to weigh what the risk is and back yourself up as far as possible to try to be able to cover it, but to also be close enough or far apart, so that you're not putting your own safety at jeopardy.
That definitely has evolved over those first few weeks. I know that our news department management, our news director, Rick Gall, kind of put new guidance in place saying we're not going to be right in the midst. Our safety, the safety of our reporters and photojournalists is most important. So you're going to be a block away. You're going to be on top of a building with a vantage point or something, right? You will not be in the midst of everything to put yourself in danger.
We have evolved and we have went from trying to keep that 6 feet of social distance to more than a block away because we have realized it is impossible to keep 6 feet of social distance in a crowd that is moving as much as they are.
That makes sense. Were most of those people wearing masks, and were you?
I have been wearing a mask 98% of the time, unless I need a breather and I'll step back for a short period of time and remove my mask because some of these days are really hot. We are wearing masks. Many of the protesters, I would say a majority of them, are not wearing masks. Some of them are. Some of them are worried, so to speak, about that infection and limited social distancing. But by and large, there are very few face masks being worn at these protests.
As this large crowd of people is marching down the streets of North Carolina's capital city, there are also counter protesters out there that you mentioned. Tell me about those healthcare workers and who else you saw that were kind of observing and what their stance was.
So the counter protesters have obviously been extremely outnumbered, but there have been anywhere between, say, 5 and a dozen or so healthcare professionals that have formed a little group of their own. I've gotten a chance to talk with them, and they say they just feel the need to be there to show that there are people with opinions that are more in line with the stay-at-home orders that are in place. They were not at the most recent event, so it's really unclear if that's kind of trailed off or if they've made their message clear. It's also important to understand that the protesters are insulting them and getting in their faces at times, and the counter protesters have really been silent. At a lot of times, they're standing with their arms crossed, they are silent, they're holding signs, and they just want to be there to say, we need to open very slowly.
I remember exactly what you're talking about encapsulated in a few moments in that same noon newscast where you were talking to Dan Bishop. Brian Mims was on the ground too, and he was interviewing one of these healthcare workers. She was in her scrubs. She had her mask on. He was interviewing her about why she was there, and I don't know who the guy was. The guy held it on a bandana, I believe I ever say, so you couldn't, see him. But he yelled, "Fake news!" over and over and over.
Protesters. We have some people from the Reopen North Carolina rally saying fake news. I've been hearing that a lot today. Lots of chants of fake news. As a matter of fact,
total freedom of speech, right? We're not saying he shouldn't say that. He was clearly doing it to make a point. He screamed that throughout the entire thing. And Brian Mims, I texted him afterwards and was like, you are a true professional, because he did not flinch, did not show anger or umbrage at all. He continued to talk to the woman and kind of held his hand over his ear that had his IFB in. And the woman, to her credit, continued to talk as well. Brian referenced, what the guy was saying. But that moment just really sort of was so demonstrative to me of these different factions and how their conflict is playing out, and how we as media really are trying to cover both sides of it, but get resistance from some people, obviously, in this era of fake news.
The era of fake news, which obviously has been trumpeted by President Trump for years now. And I think Brian Mims, a true professional, was able to keep cool because we have so much experience with that these days, of behind the scenes getting called fake news and having people shout at our face and calling us the liberal media and that we're not covering both sides. And I think at this point, it's really easy to kind of put that in the background, because we're there, we're interviewing both sides, and we're trying to paint this complete picture for people on the news at, say, 4, 5, and 6 o'clock. And some of them don't want to hear it. And I will say this, it's incredibly disheartening during this time, especially. I think that journalists, by and large, across the board, are working more than ever. And we have like an incredible mission right now, right? To inform people and to separate fact from fiction and to cover what is really irking people and how their lives are being impacted. And to be in that situation, covering a story, getting both sides, and to be called fake news is disheartening. So you have to put that kind of in the rearview mirror and say, I have a mission. I'm here for a reason. I'm here to tell people what's going on and to just avoid all distractions.
People yell it to your face. Where else do you hear it? Do you get emails or Facebook comments or anything like that?
I got an email just last night. I did a story about the cost of these protests, which at this point has been about $300,000. So the cost of these protests mainly is the cost of police and multiple law enforcement agencies, from Raleigh Police to the State Capitol Police, the State Bureau of Investigation, the Highway Patrol, the Wake County Sheriff's Office. they are all dedicating a lot of resources to this. They're pulling people from their normal duties to be at these protests. They're pulling other officers in on their days off, and they are getting overtime. So there is a cost to this. And the reason for our story was just to inform people this very public and well-known event that has been attended over the course of 5 weeks by thousands of people. Here's the cost, and here's the public expense of your taxpayer dollars.
So you got an email. I got 15 emails, maybe 20, and I've answered all of them. One of the big complaints was, you never did this for the Moral Monday protest or the Silent Sam protest or the Downtown Durham protest or the teacher protest. And the truth is, yes, we did. Every single time we've looked into that. This is not a partisan thing. Your story wasn't partisan, right? You were looking at taxpayer money, how it's being spent. How did you respond to that viewer that reached out?
I responded exactly how I just told you. I am more than willing to engage with people by email or Facebook or Twitter and to explain the reason for our coverage and explain the news value that we see in a story. I think that we owe it to the viewer when they feel invested enough to reach out to us to respond and tell them what we think. I was taken back by the people who felt that there was some kind of assertion in the story that the protests were a bad thing. I don't believe any such assertions were made in the story. I think that we were telling people what was happening and how much it cost. There was one event downtown that drew about 10 demonstrators. They were armed with guns walking through downtown. 10 people showed up, and it ended up costing about $52,000 in manpower. That's an interesting story. It's an interesting story from the standpoint of a lot of taxpayer money being spent. And it's an interesting story from the fact of what police agencies are up against in maintaining security, no matter how many people show up.
And I think that those police officers have done a really great job and really maintained their cool. It seemed like a very planned out response.
So what's interesting is that the Reopen NC group has been extremely communicative with Raleigh police. They have called them to let them know of the time and place of each of their events. And I think that that has really helped Raleigh police to plan and prepare for all of these.
That's interesting. Did they get permits for these protests?
They don't need a permit to gather, to protest. And they really don't need to tell Raleigh police or any other agency about their plans to be in a certain area at a certain time. But I think the group and the police have just realized that working together is the best option to maintain the safety of these events, because they really are drawing hundreds, if not more than 1,000 people.
Obtaining surveillance video from state-owned property. Getting the phone number for a protester's husband. How do these things happen? Joe Fisher takes us behind the scenes of his reporting, coming up.
We are outside of the legislative building where the General Assembly is convening inside for a special session. The protesters out here say they want to be heard. They want North Carolina open right now.
It has gotten out of hand a couple of times, though. Let's talk about two different instances when some protesters actually damaged a fence.
So that was the third protest. And we have since obtained some video from outside of the governor's mansion at that third protest showing one man kind of leave the larger crowd, and he started to violently shake the electronic gate right outside of the governor's mansion. It was all caught on video. That guy was charged with damaging property. And it was at that same protest where he and 3 others were also arrested for stepping onto a closed sidewalk. So that guy was violently shaking the gate. State Capitol Police then closed off the sidewalk surrounding the entire property. They told the protesters they couldn't walk onto that property. And some of them defied the orders and the warnings from police and stepped on the sidewalk anyway, including Ashley Smith, who was the is one of the main organizers of this entire movement. And it's important to know that just very shortly before all of this chaos erupted, that Ashley Smith was on the bed of a truck talking to a large crowd of people 3 weeks into this movement saying, we cannot wait any longer. And she was advocating for civil disobedience. I got a chance to talk with her husband after, who said that she did this on purpose to prove a point.
Two questions about that whole thing. You said that we obtained video, and I think we were the only station that had it. How did that come about? Do you know? How do we get video like that?
A lot of times in, say, police shootings, for instance, that video is released directly from the police department. In situations like this, we could, of course, file a public records request for that video. It was a security camera that was on state-owned property. We don't know whether we would have gotten that back or not. They could have had, an exception to the rule that they may have for not releasing that video. But we actually got the video the very next day. And that was because of sources within our newsroom who over time had, built up a relationship with some of the staff members on our team, that we were able to get that really quickly and give viewers a look at what that video looked like. And I think it just really helped to provide some context for what happened and why police shut down the sidewalk in the first place.
Absolutely. I think without that key video, it's easy to say, couldn't stand on the sidewalk. Like, why would they let him not be on the sidewalk up in front of the governor's mansion? There was a reason. There was a, act of destruction that was attempted. My second question about that whole thing is, you said that you talked to Ashley Smith's husband while he was driving back, I think, to the mountains where they're from, or maybe driving to get her out of jail. How do you go about getting a phone number for an activist's husband?
So in the case of Ashley Smith's husband, he has actually routinely been at these protests. And the moment Ashley was arrested, I was running down Blunt Street in downtown Raleigh to the patrol car where she was being loaded into. I had my cell phone in my hand. It was actually hooked up to a live feed at the station that they were able to take on TV in real time. We cut into programming because of what was happening in downtown Raleigh. It was chaos. There's no better way to describe it. Armed with my phone, running to the car where Ashley Smith was being loaded into, I got a really good shot of her in the back of the patrol car, and I actually just turned my camera like 90 degrees, and Ashley Smith's husband was outraged. He was screaming. He said, "That's my wife.
That's my wife, Ashley Smith. They arrested her for being on the sidewalk."
I tried to ask him some questions about what happened because I wasn't in the immediate area at the time, and he was filling in the blanks and saying that she stepped onto a public sidewalk. And I tried to ask him some more questions, tried to follow him while we were live on TV, and people started to crowd around me. So we ended up backing up a little bit. I then went up to him, say a half hour later, and asked him for a comment and to explain what happened with his wife. And he said, "Is this for the record?" And it's important to know that everyone is very suspicious of the media. They're not big fans of the media. And I said, "Yes, it's for the record." And he said, "Are you going to report it fairly?" And I said, "I'm going to report it how you tell me."
She stepped on the sidewalk. She was like, they had told us not to step on the sidewalk, okay? She turned to me and said, "Hey, we're going to show what civil disobedience is all about."
All paychecks are essential.
I hope that my wife taking that step would inspire you to open up your business, to go about your business, to live like you're free and stand up for the Constitution.
And that's exactly what we did. So I was able to get an interview with him. We were the only ones to have that interview that day. And that is when he said he thought the arrest of his wife, the founder of Reopen NC, was the best thing that could have happened for their movement. And he thought that it was just going to send a powerful message to people across the state that it's time to be civilly disobedient. It's time to open up your businesses. It's time to move on with our lives.
So interesting. Since then, you have continued to follow up with this group. I think you were one of just a few reporters invited to sort of a virtual announcement they were making earlier this week.
It's crazy for how much they are suspicious of the media. They have really complimented my coverage and WRAL's coverage of Reopen NC, that they think They think that we have been very fair. The organizers, the PR people think that we are covering this story from all sides. And I agree with them. And it's great that they understand that and they see that we're reporting the facts as they're happening. And that has led to them allowing us to have maybe a little bit more access and a little bit more information and getting information quicker about what's happening with this group. So I think that that's been helpful.
I mean, I think they're pretty media savvy. They know that Facebook birthed their group, but, I know that what they do is for media attention and to, make the group bigger. Tell me how you think this group and your coverage of it will evolve in the coming weeks as North Carolina opens up more and more.
I asked the organizer yesterday if they think they have had any impact on how the economy has opened up. The governor laid out this grand 3-phase plan more than a month ago, and it really does seem that despite the protests, the governor has stuck to his plan. Now, in those phases, it says that we're going to reopen, say, 2 to 3 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks. It allows some flexibility in how quickly we open, and it does seem like we are on the shorter end of that reopening. We've opened into phase 1 after 2 weeks. We've opened into now phase 2 after 2 more weeks. So they do feel like they've been able to put pressure on Governor Cooper. They feel like they've been able to put pressure, political pressure, to at least keep that process moving so that it's not delayed anymore. And they also think that, things like the judge's ruling just this week to allow indoor churches. A judge ruled that the executive order as laid out in phase 1 was infringing on people's religious freedom. And they feel the pressure that they have brought to the table has helped move those things along.
Dan Forest, who is the Republican candidate for governor and the current lieutenant governor, has come out and supported them, or at least supported what they're saying. He said something the other day that he said, we don't believe that Governor Cooper, he needs more voices around him when he's making these decisions, to basically say he needs to hear this side. And it sounds like what you're saying, these people feel like they are being heard, at least to a certain extent.
I think they are being heard, but the governor has said all along that he is not just going to open up with no data to back up the decision and no information that things are improving, at least in some of those areas.
Yeah, he and Dr. Mandy Cohen have been so, I think they use the word tempered, cautious reopening, when they talked about going into phase 2. And you're right. It's all very database for them. When you cover them next week, when they're supposed to have a bigger protest, where will you cover them from? How will you cover them?
So the past couple of protests, we have covered them from a greater distance. I think it's still important to be close enough on the fringe of this protest to be able to see what's happening, report what's happening in real time, and talk to people and interview them on camera and find out why they're there. I think the crowds are really big, but we also have a mission to really get to the bottom of who is there. Are these unemployed people who are strapped for cash and need to get back to work immediately? From 2 blocks away, I can't really learn those details. So it's really a balance every single time, trying to monitor how big the crowd is going to get, how chaotic things are going to get. And every single protest has really come with its own challenges. But I always try to get close enough to be able to tell an accurate story,
while maintaining social distance, wearing your mask, and being really careful about your health, I know. Coming up, Joe talks about how his experience being our breaking news reporter overnight, working midnight to 9, helped prepare him for some of the reporting he's doing now. You've been at WRAL now about a year and a half. You cover hard news, breaking news, crime. In the coronavirus, you covered a lot of the hard angles. You spent the first year here being a breaking news reporter overnight. Tell us about that and how that maybe prepared you for even more what you're doing now.
So the breaking news beat moves incredibly fast, and there is always something different that's happening every single day, which kind of makes it interesting. I mean, we cover a lot of crime, a lot of murders, fires that happen overnight, deadly car crashes. A lot of times I'm shooting video on the side of a highway, trying to get a video of what's shutting down traffic. And we're doing it all by ourselves. The breaking news beat is a one-man band job, which means that I'm shooting, writing, and editing all of that video and trying to turn it around as quickly as possible to get it on our website and to get it on our TV.
So you're the one that's getting the video, and then you're also putting it on the website and even sending push alerts, right?
Exactly right. So from the field, I'm able to go out, I'm able to shoot video, send that back within, 10, 15 minutes. That can then be posted on WRAL.com. We can send a push alert from the field and get it all done in a pretty quick amount of time.
That's pretty incredible. Our morning newscast is from 4:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. So it's this massive block of news. And I think that breaking news role is really important to, kind of get everything that's happened overnight that maybe a full reporter crew wouldn't be on the whole morning.
We're waking people up. It's 5.5 hours of news. And the great part about morning TV is that we do multiple hits a morning. So we're able to take the one story that happened at 2:00 in the morning and constantly update that story every half hour. So although we're covering the same story for the whole morning, we're trying to give new details every time that we appear on TV.
It's true storytelling. It's developing as it's happening, and you're, updating the story as it's happening. Any most memorable thing that you covered over that first year? And what were your hours? Did you come in at midnight?
So my hours were midnight to about 9 in the morning on most days. Obviously, news, you don't really have a typical schedule. So there's some days where I worked until 11 or noon, depending on the story. I think that most days were routine in a sense that we listen to the scanners, we go to news, and we cover it and we update it until the day is done. I think that there are some days that I can remember that just really are crazy news days that we think back, like plane crashes and big apartment fires that are displacing dozens of people.
You spent the 4 years before coming here in Virginia Beach as an investigative reporter. So you have, that background with this breaking news, hard charging, go, go, go. How did that prepare you for your beat now, which is sort of dayside, hard news, crime, but other, really impactful stories?
I think covering breaking news and spot news is an incredibly helpful thing to do for journalists just starting out. You learn how to get on a scene, you learn how to confirm information quickly, you learn how to present the information as factually as possible.
How do you confirm the information when you're on scene?
A lot of times it's through police who are maybe not there, but you're calling them, you're emailing them. Sometimes you can talk to officers, other times you can talk to neighbors or witnesses. It's always different. And I think that, once you get to a scene, you kind of have to look around, pay attention to your surroundings, kind of evaluate the situation pretty quickly to figure out, hey, can I talk to this neighbor? Can they tell me something that they saw or heard? Can I confirm that information quickly with police? And just kind of that balance of making sure that what you're reporting is accurate.
But giving a full picture by giving witness statements along with police information about maybe a suspect or timing of the event or something. When did you sleep?
So I never got into a very good routine, but I always tried to pick something in the beginning of the week and stuck to it. So if that was sleeping right after work, then I was sleeping from, say, 11 to 6 o'clock at night. Or if I picked from the beginning of the week that I was going to sleep at, 3 o'clock, I'd wake up around, 10 and then get in at midnight. So I tried to stick to something on a weekly basis, but it was an incredibly difficult shift. I talked to a lot of reporters who have worked all kinds of shifts, and I have not heard of a crazier shift than midnight to 9 a.m. It's extremely tough on your body, and it's extremely hard too when you're a reporter who is working on a story every day, and then you want to be able to follow that. You're never working when most people are in their office or at their computer or can answer their phone. So you're kind of caught in the middle between working on those off hours and then working even when you're not working to confirm information and try to further the story.
Let's say that you're better rested now.
I'd say more well rested. I think the pandemic has made all journalists not as well rested. So I'm making this transition from the breaking news beat into a more traditional news role at a very odd time. But certainly sleeping on normal hours helps.
Joe Fisher, thank you so much for all of this explanation and great stories about covering the protest, and good luck on your upcoming coverage.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to How to Commit Journalism, a podcast from Capital Broadcasting's Podcast Network. If you go to WRAL.com and search podcasts, you'll find a lot of different podcasts that we're producing. Things from restaurant reviews, which we'll be able to go to soon, and even a daily podcast about COVID-19 and the latest information coming out of it.